Welcome back to the Disrupt Education Podcast. Thanks for listening. Hey, we should thank our listeners more. Thank you, listeners. We appreciate you.
We
Alli and I are
do.
in a room. We were talking about rooms last time with Mary. What's going on, man? What's going on, Mary? What's going
Ah,
on, Alli? Wow. Hello.
well, yeah, it's just great to start. Well, no, but we really are appreciative of our listeners
Yeah.
and, shout us out. Let us know you're listening because, we want to know where you are.
Hmm.
What kind of topics do you enjoy most on the podcast? And in particular to this episode, because we just last week talked to an architect in educational design and specifically in the educational space, Mary. And, you know, what we definitely want to hear from our listeners, what kind of spaces do you really enjoy, or have you not enjoyed, or what are you in? Do you see it as like a space that is well used? So this is definitely a topic that we want to hear from you all because this this idea for this episode came about. It was like, wow, this is not an area that we've really touched on
Right.
in the podcast. And yet, right, like the spaces that we're in have a significant effect on our health and well-being and our social emotional interactions and functionality and just use of the space. And Mary really highlighted some key things that we should be thinking about. If you haven't listened to the episode, go back and listen to it. We're going to talk about spaces and their importance and how to kind of be disruptive in the educational space, literally with the spaces that you're in.
Yeah. I think it's a competitive part. I like a little
Mm.
bit of competitiveness. In like, schools, because obviously you can compete for, scores and things like that. But I like, I've like I said, you've taught in a few schools, I've taught in a few schools, and you know the differences. And it's interesting, in some schools, some of the people who are in that school will see another school and they're like, what are we doing here? It kind of provokes a conversation out of, just seeing what maybe a competing school is. And it really does. When we start talking about, and I mentioned it in the last podcast, but when we start talking about students missing school, those absence rates going up, teachers, not there's not enough. You build an environment. It's not just like a people environment, like it's actually a physical environment, right? And I think that's just so super important. Where you work and what does it look like every day? Because, right, how many 180 plus days out of the year, you as an educator, as an administrator, especially as a student, are going to be in this place. And, I could tell you right now, like the school that we have in our community is nicer than a lot of other schools. Um, that wasn't by choice. It was funny because we were looking at, where we're going to move. Um, and I'm wondering what the ratio is of students now missing school post-pandemic, with what the school looks like. Is there a freakonomics, if you will, interaction there? I don't know. It's very interesting to me.
I do think about that people care about the spaces that they are in more than ever. And
Hmm.
that got kind of illuminated during the pandemic because all of a sudden we were no longer in these buildings. We were evacuated from them, it felt like, and overnight. And then we're put in our home and we had to think about like, how do we make our home a space that we can be in all the time? Because that was not something that was typical. I
Hmm.
know during the pandemic, I lived for daily walks around the neighborhood. and being outside in the sunshine. Luckily, it was springtime and it was gorgeous that spring and everything. But I remember like, wow, this was so nice. This was like a luxury I didn't get at school. I didn't have time to go outside in the middle of the day. And that environment, I remember thinking how much I needed that outdoor space. And Mary definitely talked about the importance of nature and sounds and sunlight and all of that. And I think that kind of sparked different conversations with the school building. And I'm certain that it's continuing because we're looking at the spaces that we want to be in. It is competitive. You think
Hmm.
about where do people want to be? I love what Mary said. Like they're creating spaces where kids want to be when they're not in school.
Yeah.
Make school feel like a place that is inviting and welcoming and comfortable and all of those things that I don't think those conversations were being had at the start of her career. At least not in the same way.
Hmm.
She's been in the industry almost 30 years of architecture. And I feel like this idea of a traditional classroom, school building room, is outdated and people are thinking about like how can we flex this space? How can we make it more versatile? And the big takeaway for me is that single function spaces are out.
Right.
They're out.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking in every area of my life, it's not just schools that are doing this. If you think about restaurants or community centers or businesses, places of work, this is a hot topic.
Hmm.
And the competitive lens is if you want people in your space, you need to make it a space that they want to be in. And the competition is higher than ever because there are these really cool workspaces, flex spaces, community center spaces that schools are competing with, whether they know it or not.
Yeah. No, yeah, it is. Well, look, if you, that's why I kind of went back to if you want to like compete for educators, you better have a place that, educators want to be. I mean,
Mm.
let's again, we kind of go back into this where, um, there's a shortage, and if you have two schools that are paying very similar, you may be teaching very similar things, and one is nicer or has more of these innovative spaces than the other one. I mean that's going to be it's going to be a deciding factor. It's not. It may be. What's interesting is going back to the outdoor part. I when we first started teaching in the fall of 2020, the teachers were required to come in to the school and our district, not the students. It was awkward. It was weird. I know some schools did some different things with that. Um, I do remember a lot of teachers in nice weather taking their chair and their computer outside, finding a little bit of shade, but still being outside. I remember a lot of educators taking a walk outside around the school. There was a lot of outside the school activity, a lot. And that to me was that's a tell, right? Like, and you know, it is a struggle sometimes depending on the environment that you're in. But I like some of the things that she said about Mary said about outdoor spaces where, we can kind of make this three-season porch kind of area or a place where, it can block some of the elements in a colder environment, but you're still outside. And I really do think that is going to be a highly effective way that we can enhance our curriculum, enhance our studies, enhance our students' curiosity, that people are going to start to realize more and more. I don't think you need to build four walls, a roof, and have, I mean, of course, you have to check off the boxes for OSHA and safety and all that. But I think thinking outside the box like that is going to, you can make some of these classrooms, three-quarters of the year, and in certain areas all year, really quality places for students to learn. I love teaching outside. I right now in our construction, it's very difficult to do
Mm.
because it's just a mess outside right now. But that's just a fact of life. But I'm definitely planning on getting back outside, especially when the weather turns, and trying to figure out different ways that we can have honestly, I don't know in your experiences, but in my experiences, the kids are more engaged. They really are more engaged outside. They're,
Totally.
yeah.
Even just like switching spaces up. So two kind of stories here. One, so I teach this program in upstate New York in January, and one of the complaints from the students is that it's cold and dark and we can't go outside. Well, okay, we can't really can't change the weather and the seasons of like the location of the college,
Can you tilt
but
the earth?
they compare this January term to this kind of summer term experience, and they are comparing apples and oranges. So sometimes it's like, okay, but like how can you bring, the outside inside, if you
Mhm.
can't physically be outside? And Mary had some interesting ideas with that. And I believe, now is the time where those types of innovations are crucial. And
Mhm.
then I also think about spaces like student learning happening in unique spaces. And some of my students' favorite days was this awesome class that I got to teach. It was a freshman level physical science, but more physics based course, and it was super lab based. And the library space that I mentioned in last week's episode was actually we got to do labs in there, and we had the library had they're called spheros, and they're programmable little spheres
Mhm.
that you can then have them move at a certain speed, velocity, acceleration. You can get them to go different directions back and forth, but you can measure it. And my classroom actually was not big enough, and I had a really very nice classroom. But because of the flexibility of our library space to basically be able to move all of the tables and chairs to one side and have this huge space, essentially like a gym, but with
Mhm.
books, um, we were able to have a lab experience in the library, and students loved that lab because even though it wasn't outside, it was using a space in a totally different way. And the librarians loved it. They loved when classes would come and do innovative stuff in the library that wasn't just like, reading and writing. So they definitely created that environment. And it's so crucial that I think schools have those types of spaces. And then, of course, students loved when I would take them outside to go look at frictional forces, or, if we were looking at how water moves, well, much easier to spill water outside than inside the classroom. So if we were working out outdoors, all the better. And I always said, one of the challenges with the school schedule was, right, for a majority of the year in the northern hemisphere, you are inside
Mhm.
during all of the sunlight hours. And if you're lucky enough to have windows, it's still there's no time during the day to go outside. And for whatever reason in America, we've decided that this, 6, 7 hour school day, just start and go, 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 go all day with no stops, is the most ideal schedule. Versus I think about other countries that have a 1 or 2 hour siesta
Yeah.
or break in the day during peak, honestly, sunlight hours for people to go outside,
Hmm.
take a break. And it's not just the functional space, but it goes back into a lot of the topics that we talk about on the podcast with scheduling and how all these things are integrated, but we oftentimes we take for granted the space that we're in and how that could even impact learning and how that could disrupt education from just changing the location of where a classroom is taught. For better or for worse, it can be disruptive.
Hmm.
That's what we're
I
talking about here.
Yeah, and I'll go back. I know I said this on the last podcast, but like really, like there are certain classrooms that we are trying to avoid at this point, in business because we're not like in an area now. They're building an area for us to, create some innovative courses and different classrooms. But yeah, there are classes where we know if we're in this classroom, it's not going to be optimal. It's
Mhm.
definitely not going to maximize outcomes. And the kids know it, we know it. We try to do what we can do. A lot of them are the old computer labs, right? They are many schools out there right now have computer labs that are completely outdated. They're lined up like it's IBM in 1990. Kids can hide. It's there's a big old blocker between the people in the room, and it's
Mm.
the screen that's in, and for its time, I'm sure it was working, but the way that labs are depending like on technology and such, it's it's so outdated. And I think like that's one of the first places that we need to really take a look at. Um, and then obviously the places with zero sunlight. I meant to ask Mary this, but I think she would say this is an extreme example, but like why not and I know it's not the best thing, but to if you ever remember the movie Total Recall, like way back in the day, with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I am very much dating myself. But they used to have the wall like it was a digital wall, it was a TV, but it had like, it looked like you were looking out over a mountain range or something like that. And you could change it up. And I just feel like if that, what would that do? Just some things like that, because we have classrooms that have a classroom on top of them and on both sides. So there's no window, there's no way to do, the ceiling, the
Mhm.
nature tubes and things like that. I would just think that would be interesting. And then, again, have kids actually, okay, today's your day to create the environment. What do you want? Like, maybe a light rainstorm or the Rocky Mountains or whatever. Like you get to choose. And I think that those would be very cool ideas in situations. I just don't think that those are as expensive as rebuilding, and like Mary said, there are different ways that you can add some things. Um, but it always seems in education, I don't know what your experiences are, so I'll ask you, but like in my experiences, like it's always about, okay, we're growing in numbers, so we just need to add on. But there's
Mhm.
nothing done that much ergonomically outside of what Mary was saying, changing up HVAC, eliminating asbestos, all these things that they have to do rather than let's be innovative. There's that word again. In classrooms and try these things when we're not growing and when like we don't have to rid asbestos or change out an HVAC. Have you ever seen a school just kind of look at things that way? I haven't. Like it's always like reactive.
I I have not personally been in a proactive building that other than like individuals taking initiative, getting grant funding
Right.
and whatnot. But again, like I do like that Mary said, teachers shouldn't be burdened with this. And
Mhm.
if you listen closely to what her firm is often charged with, is that they have to design these super sustainable spaces that are ergonomically, perfect, for what they're pitching, right?
Mhm.
They have to be economically feasible. And, if you hear all of that, it it makes me think like why is education getting these basically financial breadcrumbs when this is where people spend a lot of time, and we've had guests talk about how the school building can be such a community center
Right.
and not these single function spaces. I mean, most schools, as Mary said, and as I've experienced, I'm sure you've experienced, the buildings are open before 6 a.m.
Mhm.
and there are people working in and or events happening until 10, 11 midnight
Yeah.
at times. And so these are 18-hour buildings that are being used in some way, maybe not in a way that is completely maximized, but these are spaces that are getting a lot of use.
Yeah.
And when you think about how much they get used for a large population of your community and your future of your community, why are it begs the question, like, why are we not demanding more than breadcrumbs? Like, why do you have to if you are going to get a bond issue, you are going to innovate a building in some way. Why do we have to settle for the bottom, like the bare minimum? That's what it
Right.
feels like in education so often. So it can be challenging to disrupt. And I just think it's worth having the conversation and saying, look, school buildings and educators does and the students ultimately deserve spaces that are meeting the educational needs and providing the best outcomes
Mhm.
rather than seemingly like, oh well, this is we absolutely have to do this so that we aren't like having detrimental health effects,
Yeah.
right? Like I I think there's a ton of opportunity for community members, board members, leaders in a school district to say we want more than the
Hmm.
bare minimum, and now is the time to innovate because it is competitive, and it's also now is the perfect time to change the spaces because people are looking at them more critically than ever before and want change. They don't want these traditional spaces. They want these unique maker spaces, multifunction, sustainable. Like all of these things are people that want, and it will take right innovative leaders and people who are yes people. And
Hmm.
the other thing I was thinking about when Mary was talking is when you think about getting an education, you probably didn't picture yourself thinking about I could be an advocate or could be designing or co-designing the spaces that I'm working in. And when she was talking about the workflow that's in place for switching out the LED lights and
Yeah.
how that like can you I bet an administrator who got this job didn't think they were going to be reading a report on like how do we sustainably implement LED lights so we're not wasting the funding that we even got. Like
Right.
you wouldn't ever think that that's something you're going to consider when you get in education, and yet the functionality of a building is a huge part of a school district.
Yeah. It's man, where do I continue going? Because it's just like, yeah, kids know. Kids know if you're invested in education or not. And how do they know? Well, certain buildings, right? You walk into a building, um, and then maybe you're in a sport or you're on the chess team or you're in the band and you play at another school and you see that other school, right? And it either looks better or worse because they're always, they'll judge. But if that school looks better, that kid's going to take that back and like, oh my gosh, like what is this community doing? Like they don't care about us. They're going to take that and look at it, right? Like our workspace is terrible. Same with teachers, same with administrators, same with, so if you want to compete, you got to find ways to really bring these ideas to life, right? And the other thing is people know when you facade a building, right? That is the facade, right? I've seen it before where a certain section of a school is actually rebuilt and it might be just the one front or one of the athletic pieces and the rest of the school is falling apart, right? People know that you're not fooling anybody by that. It used to be because there wasn't social media, right? It'd be like you drive by the school and the facade looks great, and you're like, that looks like a great school. But now it's access, right? And again, like Mary was saying, the communities in the school, they're working on this. And I think, also being innovative with your grant writing and innovative with the ways that you can really maybe attach, like I said, social emotional learning into environment and these things. There's a lot of this going on. I know right now in Illinois, the big push is the hiring at the administrative level for grant writers. That's their job. And, I don't know what they're writing grants for. They're just getting money for things. So I think that's a step in the right direction, albeit that grant writer actually writes more grants than they're worth, right? So if you're making 100 grand a year writing grants and you're only bringing in 50 grand, well, nah, not good, right? You should be bringing in millions of dollars. And I think that would be worth it. There's got to be some threshold there, but I think there's got to be room for ways that grant writing and visions of not only just educators and the people in the education community, but the students. Like, what do they see? How can we bring in this reality and innovate? And if we could like maybe cut out some of the roadblocks in that, I think we're on to something here. I would love to see it. I would love to see like an easier way to get money to flow and then to make things happen, especially pretty quickly. I mean, a design of a room, which I've designed several actually, um, on average, no lie, takes 2 years. It shouldn't take that long. It shouldn't take that long.
But
So
it does. As working with these aging buildings is complex. There's
yeah.
so many levels. But I think when I think about the schools that I've worked in or have heard about, right now, if there's budget cuts, it's sometimes it's not teachers. They want to keep as many as they can, but right, maybe there's a community liaison position that gets cut, or a building manager gets
Right.
reduced to kind of now you're managing two buildings. And I think if you're in a space and you don't have somebody that's looking out for it and kind of stewarding it
Hmm.
and trying to think about how to improve it, then you're not investing properly in in the community, like as a whole, because that building is so integral. And I just think we can't be cutting these key positions. Somebody has decided that they're not essential, but I would argue that they really are.
Yeah.
And, you know, uh, again, when we're trying to think about topics on the podcast that are or maybe lenses of education that you haven't considered, when we found out, oh yeah, somebody has to design the building and there's, ideas for really unique green architecture or sustainable architecture and uh, and all of this. What can we learn about the spaces that we're going to spend potentially decades of our life in?
Hmm.
And I I feel like maybe back in the day this wasn't, you just kind of accepted like, okay, I'm at the school, this is my room. And now it's like I think it's something worth questioning,
Yeah.
because the space that you're in affects your own health and it affects the student's health, and like they're all integrated.
Hmm.
And it's not something we can just kind of sweep under the rug. It the problem isn't going to go away, and
Right.
it shouldn't take so long. But that's
Hmm.
where I think the power is in smaller school districts, micro
Hmm.
schools, all this stuff. Like, right, if you're in a behemoth school building, big school district, everything moves slower because there's so
Hmm.
many levels of approval. And I
Right.
think that again, that kind of model is more and more outdated. So
Hmm.
it's like if we're thinking about disrupting education, sometimes it's not even the structure of the school day, but it's literally the structure of the building
Yeah.
that we're in or could be in. And I think that those that have the most adaptability in the spaces that they can kind of flex are going to be our future innovators, change makers, because they can, I do think it affects so many levels of the educational experience.
Hmm.
If you're in a school district that has invested from basically all levels into the learning environment and they're thinking about that deeply.
Yeah. I'm going to take this kind of a step further, especially with funding and or integration of community. Um, some schools are starting this. This is a highly debated topic. Um, Having sponsored areas of a school, of
Yeah.
local community or whatever, right? So I know like some of our sporting and athletic facilities have, there's a couple of signs up from, corporations or whatever. Thank you for supporting da 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 da. I do think there's a space for that. Maybe not elementary school, maybe not even middle school, but I do think in high school there is a space for that where let's just say this is you're in an Atlanta school district and you have like a Coca-Cola wing, right? Where possibly Coca-Cola, the company, and it doesn't have to be a ginormous company, but get some tax credits for putting some things together for your local school. I'm sure there's laws. I'm sure people are going to be like all over this podcast saying blah blah blah. I get it, but I'm not here to think inside the box. I'm here to like disrupt some things. So, you can create something like colleges do, right?
Yes.
So for Illinois State has Farmers Insurance, I believe it's Farmers, basically built their business school, right? And it says it right on it, right? Why not high schools? Why not local communities? And then offer like exchange for time in these areas, possibly some projects. If we're going to ask community members to come in and work on science, math, English, history, business, art projects, we should probably give them a say and possibly an opportunity to fund some of the areas that we can kind of connect these places. And I think, I mean, I'm all for that. I know some people are like, oh, well, you're now sponsoring this for blah blah blah. And I'm like, it's everywhere. And it's also a learning point, right? For business in general. Like, why would Coca-Cola want to build this wing? And we have those conversations. But having access to that, I think would actually bring the community and school together even more and potentially drive people to make those innovative changes
Mm.
in a proactive way, not in a reactive way. So
Oh.
I don't know. Just wanted to throw that out there.
I actually really love that idea, and it is already leaking into public schools. If you're not aware of this,
Yeah.
it's more and more common for it's typically around athletic events. I'm
Hmm.
not entirely sure why, but maybe it's just because that's what's going to get the most exposure.
Hmm.
But if your school districts kind of like um the it's usually in the football stadiums. Like they'll have either redone the turf or they'll have like the big giant screen is often it's not uncommon, I should say, for that
Yeah.
to have been sponsored by a company. They, paid for it so
Hmm.
they could have an updated Megatron experience or and I've worked sporting events where the announcers, and you do announcing, Peter,
Hmm.
so I don't know if this is, they have to announce essentially like sponsors of the game.
Yeah.
And there are like commercials during um
Yeah.
timeouts or halftime
Hmm.
before and after the game where they shout out sponsors for the either for whatever it is that
Hmm.
they're sponsoring, but oftentimes it is like the electronics I've seen
Yeah.
more and more common. So it's like, okay, it's already in there. Let's just blow that idea up and why not sponsor a wing? Why
Yeah.
not sponsor a new building? Break ground for something.
Yeah.
I think it's a
Um,
great idea.
yeah, some sort of labs since that's this, giving the opportunity to build out there. Yeah, and it is funny, yeah, because in the state Illinois series, I do have to announce a few that they're straight up sponsorships. I don't have to do it like at our home games or anything like that, unless, we have some contract, which I don't think we have. But in the state series in Illinois, yeah, there's certain sport equipment companies that you are required to announce in a ball game, right? And I know, I can imagine like possibly in the big, maybe football arenas and such. I'm thinking about Texas or Florida. There is in high school and such like that. There's probably more of that, but I just think there's opportunity here. And I know like people start to get, I've had heated debates about this with people. Yeah, you can't, they're selling to our children. Well, I'll tell you what. our high school kids aren't that stupid. Like they know, right? And also we can create curriculum around that, right? And teach them because what are we trying to teach our kids to do anyway? They're gonna go into the real world, so we might as well kind of expose it in a place where we can help them out. But also, it could be a pipeline for a great job or a great career in math, science, English, history, and opening these kind of muddy areas where people don't really know what they want to get into. It could be an opportunity for them to see their local community and then work in an environment that entity or those entities have really kind of helped create for our students. I think it's out there. I don't know that I didn't want to ask Mary that because I'm sure she wasn't going to say anything about like sponsors or anything like that. But I see that as a viable option here. So, but yeah, you know what? After the podcast, and I wanted to ask you on this podcast, but we talked to Mary and she asked us what are our favorite classrooms types or that we've ever taught in. So yeah, I'm going to ask you that question so our listeners can hear that, and I'll share mine before we wrap up.
Yeah. So, for me personally, as a science educator, I, my favorite teaching environment that I had is called a collab. So it's a classroom and a lab space all in one.
Hmm.
And it was a huge room. I mean, I really, in terms of science classrooms, had an amazing room. It had windows, it had sunlight, like it had a view, beautiful view, and all the things that you would want.
Hmm.
And I loved it because in, kids could flex, and there were places to sit, stand, lay on the floor. The lighting could have been better, but like it had the ability to have some of the lights on, not like all on or all off, and easy access around the room, and visibly, like I had good eyes across the room. There wasn't like a pole or anything in the way that would potentially kids could hide
Right.
for tons of natural light, and which actually posed a problem when I would teach you know stuff that needed to be in the dark.
Yeah.
It's like this whole rigmarole to actually block off all the light. I had usually to go to another classroom that had
Right.
like the black curtains
Hmm.
that was designed. But yeah, like I and that room got used. So our actual science classrooms oftentimes got used for community events because they were so spacious and they were so big. So it wasn't like sometimes I would get a notice that, hey, your classroom's being used tonight. You can't stay in it and work. Like uh, I thought that was always great because, you know, the room had such depth,
Yeah.
literally, like physically, and then it could do so much. And then I was right by to be able to go outside to this courtyard. So like the actual
Yeah.
location relative to outdoor spaces made it very easy to flex outside, and I could visually see like, oh, is that space available or not?
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so all those kind of things for a high school level science classroom, I was extremely blessed in what I had for 6 years. And I having not I've seen and taught in classrooms that don't have those types of things, and so I know I was like striking the lottery with that room in terms of spaces.
Right. I'm very similar to that. I really like the flexible spaces. There are collaboration tables. There is a couple of couches, and just movable furniture
Yeah.
everywhere. There's kind of a command center, if you will, if the teacher needed to go to like a little like desk or possibly a podium or something like that. As a matter of fact, our school right now is working with us to do these amazing things. We're looking at creating another classroom to be very, very flexible with that, with lights and different things like that. I also, and I'll mention them because I've worked with them before. It's Uncharted Learning, the incubator course. They have like a setup, and I've taught in two different classrooms that are incubator courses. But you can use them for other things, but really to get kids like working collaboratively. Um, we had one where there was an office with a big window, like it was the actual separation was a window. So you can kind of see, you don't want kids goofing off in there, but there's an area there that is kind of like a boardroom, if you will.
Mm,
And kids really do respond to it. They put their feet up, they look relaxed, but man, they just the curiosity was running wild in those courses, and very bright, lots of quotes on the walls. Um, nice colors that bring out really curiosity and learning.
mm,
In I really enjoyed teaching in those classrooms. Every one of them had windows in them. And just the movable furniture. The other thing that I didn't mention to Mary, which I probably should have, is like um, white board paint across the entire classroom. So the wall would
yes.
be entirely
Mm,
whiteboard. I've worked with a couple of different lab spaces, like 1871 here uh, in Chicago. M Hub is another one, manufacturing hub in Chicago, where they're just amazing spaces where it just oozes innovation. It just oozes
mhm.
ideation. And just to have like kids go up on a wall and just start
Yep.
writing things out is such a help too. So yeah, those are my favorite classrooms. So and active classrooms, even growing up in my school days, were the ones that I really enjoyed. So yeah. What are you thinking? What are your final thoughts on this kind of wrapping this up for now, but I'm guessing we'll probably get back to this topic of environmental learning, if you will.
I think we will.
Yeah.
And one a phrase that I've used over the years that I think applies here is variety is the spice of life.
Hmm.
And I think in a classroom setting, changing it up, getting kids out of a quote unquote traditional space so they think that the real world isn't, rows and chairs and looking at a board all day long. And so I think there's opportunities to have more variety in the spaces that students are learning in and teachers are educating in. And technology is more and more robust, which should allow us during the school day to use that time use the physical spaces more in a with more innovation.
Hmm.
So I think if we don't want kids in front of screens as much, I'm a huge advocate for that, then we need to not design spaces that are basically like channeling students towards a tech-centered model.
Yeah.
And so I love the idea of whiteboards all over the walls. And when I think of workspaces and kind of flex spaces that businesses have, they typically have tons and tons of whiteboarding space
Hmm.
because there's something magical that happens when we put our ideas down from pen to paper or pen to a wall or a whiteboard or some kind of thing. And I'll end with this. My where I student taught, the classroom that the teacher had was like so lucky with at least, I want to say, 8 whiteboards. And some of
Wow.
them were like the ones that I had this in my room where it was basically 3 in 1. You could kind of hide stuff. It was like thirds, but I
Hmm.
had a bunch. But then she also had these ones back in the library, and every single day, I mean, almost every single day, those whiteboards were filled
Yeah.
with student learning. And I remember thinking, when I got my first classroom and I didn't have that, I just remember being so bummed. And I got like individual ones, but it wasn't the same. Like it being the learning being on the walls, like is so magical.
Yeah.
And when you mentioned that, I was like, oh, that is a great thing. We're gonna have to tell Mary to listen all the way to the end of this episode so
Yes.
that she can get that idea in her architecture world if it
Yeah.
isn't already there.
100%. I know they do make those whiteboards on desks and tables too, as well. But you're right. When you walk into a room and you see what like period 3 did all over the place, now you know that there's action going on in there. and it is not on your phone or on a screen, which I love. So very well put. Well, we got some more guests coming up, some innovative guests. I feel like we're in this kind of ideation area of the podcast, which is a great place to be as we kind of break into deep spring here. And early summer, I think it's a great time to really kind of rest and reflect as an educator. However, also look ahead and see, okay, what am I going to do differently next year? Or, how am I going to bring innovation into a classroom? And hopefully we're helping you do that. So for Alli Privitt, I'm Peter Hostrawser. We want to thank everybody again for listening, tuning in. Share this out. If you have an idea, or you want somebody to hear like, hey, these guys are talking about innovation in classrooms, well, share it out. And, connect with us at disrupteducation.co or link up with Alli or I on LinkedIn, and we can definitely have more of a conversation. Thank you, everybody. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode of the Disrupt Education Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Are you ready to disrupt the educational arena you're a part of? For more ways to get involved in the work we do here at Disrupt Education, check us out at disrupteducation.co or find us on LinkedIn at Peter Hostrawser or Alli Privitt.
Our mission here is to help facilitate and amplify changes in the educational system through local initiatives and help you scale them into community movements. Our building network of disruptors in education are working to move beyond scores and grades as the only measure for student learning. If your school district, college, campus, or organization is looking for facilitators of this work, reach out on our website or social media.
And if you have any thoughts or feedback on this week's episode or any episode, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries, taking risks, and most importantly, disrupting education.